Good morning, everybody. It's Thursday morning and welcome to Penn Vicarage. Lovely to see you. Thank you, as always, for joining us for our Bible reflection for today, continuing our adventure through the remarkable book of Exodus. And today we're in chapter 3. Incidentally, if you missed yesterday's, I had a few software glitches yesterday, the one on chapter 2, it is there, so do look at this afterwards or whatever. Exodus chapter 2 is on Facebook yesterday and YouTube, of course, so if you want to find that, just go and look at it later if you wish. Anyway, today we're in Exodus chapter 3 and with Moses, and he's gone into the desert because he jumped too soon and killed an Egyptian and got into trouble, but got himself a wife in the process. And a few years later, this is what happens. Exodus chapter 3. Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him out in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Then Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this great sight, and see why the bush is not burnt up. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see him, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Come no closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. He said further, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings. I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the country of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me. I have also seen how the Egyptians oppress them. So come, I will send you to Pharaoh and bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? He said, I will be with you, and this shall be a sign for you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people up out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain. But Moses said to God, If I come to the Israelites and say to them, The God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said further, Thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, Thus you shall say to the Israelites, The Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this my title for all generations. Go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, The Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob has appeared to me, saying, I have given heed to you and to what's been done to you in Egypt. I declare that I will bring you up out of the misery of Egypt, to the land of Canaan, of the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Amorites, and the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. They will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us now go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, so we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. I know, however, that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my wonders that I will perform in it. After that he will let you go. I will bring this people into such favour with the Egyptians that, when you go, you will not go empty-handed. Each woman shall ask her neighbour, and any woman living in the neighbour's house, for jewellery of silver and of gold and clothing. And you shall put them on your sons and your daughters, and so you shall plunder the Egyptians. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, so picking up from yesterday, from chapter 2, Moses has blotted his copybook. He killed an Egyptian. He knew God was going to do something special with him somehow, but he jumped too soon. Therefore he'd fled into the desert, and while he was there, he met Jethro, and he'd married his daughter Zipporah. So Moses had gained a wife. You also notice later on that Moses also gained a wise voice in the person of Jethro, who appears later as a very, very wise person in Moses' ear later on. But we'll come to that later. So Moses is doing his own business, minding the flock, and then he sees this bush, which is fire, but it's not being burnt up. And it's interesting, actually, we tend to think that God speaks out of the bush. And it's not actually what it says. It does actually say an angel speaks out of the bush. God does not just speak to us through, audible voices. God speaks to us through people. God speaks to us through the Bible. God speaks to us through prayer. God speaks to us through things. God speaks to us through situations and so on. But it doesn't actually say that God spoke out of the bush. It actually says an angel of the Lord. So we need to be aware of the fact that God can talk to us in all sorts of different ways. Okay. Then you notice, of course, with this bush that it's burning, but it's not burning up. And this is odd because when bushes burn, they burn up. It kind of happens, doesn't it? And so what's this about? Well, I think it certainly got Moses' attention, certainly, but also it demonstrates the fact that God was about to do something special in Egypt, and to do that, he was going to do a remarkable series of things like sending frogs and darkness and all sorts of what you might call supernatural things. And then, in a sense, this supernatural act here with this non-consumed bush being burnt and not being burnt up, it was kind of prefiguring the fact that God was about to do something very, very special. It was something which wasn't just natural. God was going to act, and God was going to act decisively, and God was going to do something that only God could do. So then you find out of the bush, this voice angel calls Moses, and notice it calls him by name. So it's quite clear, Moses, the name is given. And quite often in the Bible, the same thing happens. The resurrected Jesus, of course, when Mary goes into the garden, the last thing she expects is to see Jesus alive, having seen him die but 2 days before. And he says to her, Mary, it's something quite common here, that when God calls, God is clear, and God calls by name. That's quite interesting, and it does that as well. And then Moses replies, and then God says, I am the God of your father. I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Jacob. And in a sense, what God is saying here is that I am the same. He's the same God that was there with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is not some new invention. This is the same God who acted so decisively through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is the same God who is there today. And that's kind of really important to recognize. This is not some new religion or something. This is the same God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who we now know as the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. The same God that was working then is working with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, with Moses, and with Jesus, and with us today. It's the same God all the way through. It's important to recognize that. And then, of course, God says that he has heard the cries of the people. They are desperately under slavery in Egypt, and God says, I have heard it. And I'm going to bring you out. And because Pharaoh is who Pharaoh is, it's only going to be a mighty act that's going to allow him to do that. But I'm going to bring you out to a land of milk and honey, a land where the Perizzites, the Jebusites, and all the other ones. The Jebusites, interesting for the people who lived in what we now call Jerusalem. And God says, I'm going to do this. But then, interesting, Moses' response. So God calls Moses. God says he's heard the cries of the people. God says what he's going to do by his mighty hand. Then Moses kind of responds with a certain amount of self-doubt here. And in a sense, a complete sense of unworthiness. Who am I? Who am I to do this? And notice, of course, when he first meets God, when he recognizes it's God, he's told to take off his shoes because this is holy ground. And in face of such holiness, in face of this genuine call of God, Moses' response is to say, I'm unworthy, I can't do this. And actually that's a sign throughout the Bible. Whenever somebody is called by God, be it Moses, Moses happens later when you find he can't speak very well as well. And so God gives him Aaron to do the talking for him. And when God speaks through Isaiah, I'm a man of unclean lips. When God speaks to Jeremiah, I'm a little boy. And whenever God calls somebody, there's always a sense in the Old Testament, especially, that they're unworthy and who am I? And so we know totally that it's God's work or not ours. And to this day, if someone comes to me, they've been called by God, if they come with some sense of unworthiness, that's usually a sign. It's much more likely to be a sign of a genuine call by God. So in the face of this, God then equips him and says, and he does, and Moses says, who shall I say sent me? And God gives him a new name, I am, or I am who I am. And it's quite interesting, really, because what does that actually mean? And apparently there's no verse in the whole Old Testament which has been pored over more than this particular. What is meant when God says, I am who I am, became known as YHWH, or Yahweh. When you see in the Bible and the word Lord is spelt out capital O, capital R, capital O, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, it's signed for Yahweh. It's the new name of God. It also, I think, is when Moses says, "Who shall I send you?" And God says, "I am who I am." And of course, later in the New Testament, of course, when Jesus said, "Before Abraham was, I am," talking about himself. The "I am" thing again here is code for the name of God. And that's why the people at the time get so wound up, because Jesus is giving himself the name I am, which of course is God's name given to himself at the burning bush. So lots to think about here. It is there are thousands of sermons I could give on this particular verse, but here are all sorts of things. Here it's the voice of an angel, God's messenger speaking. Do recognise that God is acting supernaturally by the bush not being burnt up. Then of course you've got Moses being called by name. Then you've got it being the same God, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, the same God now, the same God that we know today. That God says he's heard the voice of his people and he'll be with them. Moses, however, becomes aware of his own unworthiness, and so he calls to God, who gives him a new name and reassures him. And of course, I would say that any genuine call of God is almost always accompanied by a sense of unworthiness, because it is God who's calling. And finally, well, one thing you could talk about is this name of God. I am who I am, Yahweh. That special name for God, which Jesus actually gave to himself later. Friends, there's masses in this. Just read it again and enjoy it at your leisure. There's lots to feel the byplay between Moses and God. It's amazing. Just love the chapter. Read it again later if and you'll love it. Exodus chapter 3. More tomorrow, my friends. Thank you so much for watching. Do please forward these messages, share them. The share button at the bottom. Share them with your friends as well, so other people can enjoy them too. Have a lovely Thursday, and more tomorrow. And don't forget, if you missed yesterday's, it is on Exodus chapter 2. It is on Facebook and YouTube.